Hello Assassins, Gargudon here, and welcome to episode 18 of the Memory Corridor here on The Ones Who Came Before. Today we're going to be doing the second of our several retrospective looks at older Assassin's Creed games, with a focus on Assassin's Creed 3 and its semi-spin-off, ACIII Liberation today. Joining me as guest once again is the immensely talented portrait artist Lisa Zaman. Say hi.
Hi.
Great to have you back here. So,
Good to be back.
Now let's hop in the Animus back to revolutionary America for this retrospective. So the first thing I would like to talk about is, what were some of your favorite and least favorite elements about Assassin's Creed 3 in terms of, among other factors, story, characters, and gameplay?
Goodness, where should we start? It is kind of a game of, for me, it was definitely obviously a game of two halves. The fact that you begin as Haytham. For me, I came in very late to AC, so I returned to play the games in order. So I was already aware of the main character in AC3, being Connor. So starting my journey as somebody completely different really threw me. But
yeah.
I loved it. I loved playing as Haytham to start off with. I think there's some absolutely incredible storytelling within AC3. Probably some, I don't know. It's probably to be as concise as possible. The time period always fascinated me anyway. So I'm just trying to. I really like it, but I think the mechanics of the game bring it down.
Yeah, in some ways.
I think it can be very repetitive at times. I mean, a lot of games can be like that, but I felt at times it was very grinding, and I just wanted to get on with the story. And
perhaps, it's interesting what you say with starting as Haytham, because I remember that as one of the biggest burdens of the game, is that the start, I've played through it twice, the story. The beginning with Haytham, like the first 3 memory sequences, can get kind of lengthy in the sense that, you already hear about this other protagonist, you really just want to play as him, and there wasn't really a lot of breaks in between Haytham's missions. Like, a lot of it was just sewn together, like it was memory after memory and memory after memory. You could never really take a break. But then when you unlock Connor,
I know what you mean. You'd return, yeah.
But then when you unlock Connor, everything becomes a little better.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I think I've always been one for really loving the voice actors and loving the characters. So for me, Adrian Hoff doing Haytham was just perfect. I kind of just got caught up in that. So for me, that gameplay wasn't so significant until it became a grind. Because obviously you've got that, it's on the back of the American Revolution.
Yeah, that's another thing you said was the historical time period. I love that whole, in reality also, latter half of the 1700s, with the Age of Enlightenment and, revolutionary, or revolutions.
Because it wasn't such a great...
Yeah, it wasn't
such black and white.
It was really
situation. It wasn't a them or us. It wasn't...
Yeah. In the real world, it was really the time
so
when the world as we know it slowly was born. That,
exactly.
People started, standing up to their rulers, their kings, and in general, people began to stand up to the church, especially, who had so much power and, fed and, who suppressed science, who suppressed what, the truth and such, or scientific facts. Let's rather call it that.
There were so many power struggles going on within the country, within the United States, as it was, within
Europe,
within the government, within the churches, within the people themselves. We're not talking about the indigenous.
Yeah,
just having an issue.
like, you
We're
know,
talking
that's
about,
it. Like,
the, you know, the settlers.
in the US,
and
you
then
know, as
also, you know,
as
on
you
top of
said,
that, the English marching
absolutely.
around.
As you say, during that time, you know, in the US, what was called British America at the time, you know, the original 13 colonies, you know, people started standing up to that, and the United States became a nation, and, you know, that inspired the French to chop off the king's head in a public square, and you know, that's where unity takes place. And just all around Europe, really, like, it may not have been in the form of revolution, but people started to defy their kings. Like, in Denmark as well. Have you ever heard of the film A Royal Affair by any chance? It's a Danish film. It's with Mads Mikkelsen, who most people probably know, and such.
Mads Mikkelsen.
And Alicia Vikander and such.
Is it Alicia Vikander?
It is.
Yes,
yeah.
yes.
That film, you know, tells the story of Mads' character, who was called Johann Strunze, who was a German doctor, who had an affair
that's right, yeah.
who had an affair, you know, with the king's wife, and that was King Christian VII of Denmark. But, you know, hadn't it been for him, and, you know, him, you know, getting under the skin of the king, you know, most of the stuff, you know, that is the foundation of our Danish democracy likely wouldn't have happened. He changed so much, and, you know, changed the power tides, and so that latter half of the 1700s in general was just a time of change, Age of Enlightenment, as it's called, and that's what I love about this, and the time, what makes, like, this era of Assassin's Creed in history my favorite.
Yeah, I mean, you've got so much more. I mean, obviously, I mean, this coming off of Brotherhood, you know, you had a much bigger map to play with, the whole, you know, the frontier, the whole spectacle of troops en masse, to see that, and to not just, you know, include your, you know, weaponry, you know, the type of weaponry we were seeing in Assassin's Creed 3, for me, was pretty good. You know, you've not just got pistols. You know, you've got bows, you've got arrows, you've got tomahawks.
Yeah, that was
blades.
There was a lot of cool stuff about that, and one thing
I think people forget that. I mean, sometimes you're like, oh, but what about this? You're like, but what about your weapons?
Yeah, there was a lot of cool weapons, and as you said a little earlier, the mechanics were maybe a little troubly, but was it the remastered version you played, or was it the original?
I played the remaster.
That's it, because the remastered version touched up, improved a lot of mechanics as well that weren't that polished or great on the Xbox 360 version, which I otherwise played years ago.
Was this one of the very first ones where you could use another person? You could use an enemy as a human shield.
That was the first time, because it was really the first game where shooting was largely incorporated. You know, shooting weapons and such.
Because you had the rifles and bayonets on rifles as well.
Yeah, and in the Ezio games, it was really just Ezio's tiny arm pistol. And then in the St. Borgia Guards had, like, experimental rifles, but nothing you could pick up and use, and
But I mean, you've got, you know, the American Revolution. You've got those rifles. You've got those bayonets on the end of them. You've got
absolutely, and what was it? You said another thing I wanted to touch upon was one of the, you know, I do quite a lot of, you know, gaming photography. And that was a gift with the remastered version, was the ability to take screenshots, because, oh my, the frontier, that map is so diverse and so beautiful. And in a way, I kind of forgotten how beautiful and massive it is. You know, that covers the natural landscapes of New England, from Pennsylvania to Massachusetts to everything, really.
Yeah.
It's so beautiful.
Glorious,
and the homestead too was pretty beautiful.
Yeah, I mean, I do. I think some of those moments are very special for when it was created. You know, I think even as though I mean, yes, I know I am aware it's been remastered, but even back then, some of it just looks absolutely glorious, absolutely glorious.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, you know what it's like with all characters as well. You get your favourites, and I suppose I was aware of Assassin's Creed. I suppose Ezio is always going to be the face for quite a lot of people. And I suppose I did remember that I did play. I think it was Brotherhood previously. So going from that to Connor was quite a contrast.
It was
and I
definitely.
suppose on reflection, he's very for me. Ezio is very in your face. He doesn't, and Connor had this. I suppose for me, he had this quiet reserve, and it could almost be seen as kind of boring or kind of.
Yeah, like that's the thing with Connor's character that while it wasn't terrible, I really like parts of the character. Parts of him were maybe a little awkward, is the best way to say in a way. But then again, that is done justice, in the sense that he's a Native American, he has lived in the wild for all those years, but then, he's a total stranger to city life. Like, even by the end of ACIII, he's still, like, what's going on? Where am I?
And almost you think to yourself, is it a case of he's just almost like shut down a part of himself as a coping mechanism? And I know that sounds mad, just talking about it as a character. I'm fully aware that he's not real, but as a character, that kind of still calmness that's actually incredibly dangerous. He's always watching and paying attention rather than just acting on
he was a good character. And I really like parts of him, and I loved his outfits, and, I'm a pretty big fan of, like, Native American mythology and culture and such, so that was obviously really cool as well, but as I said, I would love to see more of him. Maybe if that's live action in a game or something, just, if anything, to see a little more of him, and see more of his legacy. Maybe even, from what I know from some comic books, see his daughter in a game. Maybe even play as her. That would be super awesome. But yeah, Connor was, I guess, a decent character is all I'll say right now. The story itself, can we touch upon that for a minute? Like, while I wouldn't say Assassin's Creed 3 was necessarily the most impactful story, at least not in the past, it still had its moments, and, it was interesting to see Connor, develop from this scarred young man to mature man, and, his struggles with his father, and that ideology clash.
There's a lot for that character to go through in such a small period of time, because you really are establishing from the get-go, I suppose. So there's a lot to cram in without either rushing it too much or going so slowly at the pace that people lose interest, I suppose. But I mean, for me, ACIII seemed to bring up a lot of new things. I think, I don't know, I can't remember which studio did.
That was Montreal.
ACIII.
I think it was
Montreal.
Montreal.
In Montreal.
Yeah.
I mean, was it the first time we were in a Black Flag? Wasn't the first time we were in a boat? Was it? No, there was naval combat.
Because that was
wasn't there in ACIII?
Yeah, I remember the ship fighting mechanics and naval combat mechanics were introduced in AC3 through various side missions.
There was quite a lot, I think.
And then they just they put that on steroids with Black Flag.
Steroids, yeah.
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 And fully implemented it into the open world aspect of it, and was just really that was well done. And another thing, as I said, with story was I think AC3 story-wise was heavier and maybe even better on the modern day side there. With Desmond making his big sacrifice at the end, and Abstergo, the clashes with Abstergo and Desmond and his father, kind of that struggling chemistry there, and that was pretty decent. And their goal was to save everyone from the 2012 apocalypse.
That's oh my goodness.
Back when that was a thing.
That was right, because it was I'm just trying to remember, like the Grand Temple in the cave in Tyranny. It was in New York, wasn't it?
Yeah, upstate New York.
Upstate New York. But Yeah, as a whole, I think it's probably not one of my favourites, but time period wise, it is.
Absolutely, and
You know what I mean? Not necessarily the game itself or the story, but the actual. I suppose, for me, now that it's been over like a year and a bit after playing it for the very first time, I can look back on it now, and because at first I was like, oh, I don't like it, I don't like the characters, I'm not that keen on this, and I think I just kind of played through it and wasn't really paying much attention. But going back on it and realising, going through all the other menus and thinking about the actual mechanics and gameplay of each Assassin's Creed, ACIII Montreal really did bring in a lot of very good stuff that
absolutely, and
kept, or that they improved and they worked on it even further. There was a lot. I think it was such a big time period that they could have possibly even got away with making another one. But,
like as I said, AC3's story was good, but then again, it could have been a lot stronger at points. I also like that part,
Do you
where
feel like they
Haytham
drifted off into areas where they didn't necessarily need to?
maybe
At times, or maybe just focus a little bit too long on something. You'd be like, come on, let's just get back to it.
Like, I definitely enjoyed that part, like, towards the end, where Haytham and Connor put aside their differences. If you remember that. And that's also interesting, there we kind of get a little bit into the ideologies of both cults. And which is something I think also coming off of Rogue, which is really interesting. And Haytham himself is, as you say, a brilliant character, and he's conflicted maybe, like, he's so dedicated to the Templar cause, and he has no problem killing his own son if that's what it takes.
If that's what it takes, yeah.
And that reminds me, can we talk about that for a second? Charles Lee. He was an interesting character. He was kind of like, I guess, we see a lot of him in the beginning, during the Haytham sequences. Then he kind of disappears for a little while. Then he shows up again. Then he goes off the radar for a little bit more. And then he's just like suddenly the main villain. And while I definitely liked him, and he was very threatening and sinister in his own way, even by his looks.
But he was almost pantomime.
Yeah, because at one point he's like, Connor, I will kill you and everything you hold dear, I swear. And then he just disappears. And then when Connor comes to him like, now I'm going to kill you, then he just runs away. Like, no. Then you'd be a man and you would fight him. And that ending was kind of poetic as well, him fleeing, Connor finding him at the bar, them having one last sip each, and Charles is just like, just get it over with.
Yes, see, that was more like it, but yeah, I almost felt he was a bit pantomime. They had a good character,
but he was.
They weren't sure exactly
a little mishandled.
How to utilise him to the. Yeah. I don't think they utilised him to his fullest, and for me, whilst he was great. It did exactly what you were meant to do. Just hate him.
Absolutely. And finally, in terms of this, like the gameplay itself, as you say, I quite enjoyed it. That's an important factor for me in open world games. There was a good variety. There was the main story. There was the you remember the peg leg missions, the naval missions, and then there was some of the different forts you could conquer and hunting activities, which was pretty cool as well.
Hunting. I mean, hunting was a new thing as well, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was.
They just added lots of things.
Yeah, there was.
At that point.
There was.
But it didn't feel... When you go back and you list everything that they put in, you think, okay, so they added all these weapons, and they added... they extended the map by this much, and they added naval and hunting. But when you think about it, it actually was a very good progression without actually cramming too much in, and people going, "Oh, I don't like the way this is happening. I don't like this. This is not good for me. I don't like it," because it could, what people are like. You get very stuck on the way the gameplay is. If it changes and you don't like it.
And another thing was the homestead. I like the idea of that, kind of building your community and lots of everything from like the Irish Scottish drunks to the runaway mother who was a tailor, and and that was pretty interesting. So yeah.
And
But
I think it shows within the community there is a lot of love. There is a lot of love in this
Yeah.
game.
Absolutely.
And I quite like the fact that it's always, when sort of speaking to other people, it's always something very different with everyone. It's never the same thing, which I think is good. Because obviously it brings out different things in people that they, that they appreciate.
Absolutely. With that said, I was thinking maybe we could move on to talking about, like, if you feel like Assassin's Creed 3 has left behind a remarkable legacy, and how do you feel like that's looked upon today?
No, I think it has, like I just said.
Yeah.
I think it's one that people always go back to.
Absolutely.
I think there's a lot of, I don't think people look at it as rose tinted as people do with the ACIII trilogy.
Yeah, that's the thing. In terms of how much of a household name Assassin's Creed 3 is compared to the ACIII trilogy, Assassin's Creed 2 alone, it's definitely not up there with that.
It's not, but it had a lot to live up to when you
coming off of the ACIII trilogy, definitely
coming off and sort of people
yeah,
go,
and I wasn't
and doing such a brave thing of changing the assassin.
Absolutely.
I mean, yes, I know we already had it between Altair and then going on to obviously onto
ACIII,
but ACIII,
I mean,
did such an incredible job.
I wasn't playing Assassin's Creed at the time when it originally came out in 2012, but some of my friends were playing it, and I was watching a lot of, at the time, just gaming videos online, so I watched a few AC3 videos just for the sake of it, and from how I remember it, there was a lot of mixed reception towards it. I think people said that it's good, like it's a good game, but it just doesn't like reach the same epic heights that previous games have done. Which is totally understandable and is cool, but on its own, Assassin's Creed 3, I think we can both agree on that, it is pretty great. But in terms of like how much, as we said, of a household title it is in the Assassin's Creed catalog, in terms of if it's one like people come back to usually and one that is talked about the most, I wouldn't really say so. That it has really left its mark in the sand. And also in terms of just the story aspect of it, like there's a lot of, from how I understand, there is quite a lot of bias towards Connor as a character throughout the community, but if anything, Haytham, he's like the most beloved. Also just because of, we see more of him. We see like a mini version of him in Black Flag. We see him again in Rogue, and he's a really interesting character.
Yeah, and he is. He's the villain that people love to hate, and I think that's always good when you have a villain as such, that it's very hard to dislike them, even though they are doing the worst things ever. You're like, but I can maybe just see why people like him as much as they do. He's probably out of all of the kind of Templars, I know he's the Grand Master, but he's always going to be up there.
Absolutely. So I guess in terms of how AC3 is looked upon today, it's one of those games that is not going to be looked upon or talked about unless you start talking about it, unless you take the initiative. Because a game, I talked about that in the last episode where we looked at the ACIII trilogy. Like AC2, you don't even have to mention it. AC2 alone just has its place in video game history as like the game that like kicked off this franchise as we knew it until it went full fantasy RPG, whatever the hell it is nowadays. But AC2 is a household title. And AC2 has such a legacy that really no other AC game has ever reached the same heights of, if you ask me.
But it was so different. It was so different from everything else that was out there.
Absolutely.
And
AC2 or 3?
Yeah.
Just
Two.
Oh yeah.
There was nothing else out there like it. I mean, I don't know.
Not at the time, quite, considering like what else was out at the. Let me think. At the time, 2009, like other major... That was still a time, from how I understand it, when the open world genre as we know it was still being developed. Like, at the time it was Grand Theft Auto, which was still quite big, and obviously ACIII was quite different 600 years earlier, but it had some elements of it, in the sense that it's about killing people, and it's open world, and maybe even some mission structures were kind of similar, even though it wasn't about driving cars and doing drive-bys and whatnot. But just in terms of open world structure, it did share a lot of similarities with that. I can't really think of any other like big open world titles at the time, really.
No, because I don't think there were. There probably were. But
yeah.
Not that I recall. And maybe just because it wasn't fantasy, because it was grounded in history, people could identify with it. People could find out more about it.
Yeah.
So I know that's where sometimes AC has come unstuck. You've just, the attention to detail. It has been amazing, absolutely amazing. So people could go to Florence, and see these places for real, and to
absolutely.
feel even more, absorb themselves even more in a game that was brought to life.
Have you been down there ever in Florence?
I've been to Italy many times, and the only place I still haven't been is Florence.
When I went to Florence in the summer of 2016, and that was just like, oh, I've been there. Oh, I killed someone there. Oh, I jumped off that building. I climbed those walls, and I think obviously the scales are a little off balance, but I think I once had ice cream on the bench where Ezio dies, or the one closest to it, where he's met by that bowl haircut idiot guy, and he passes away. Yeah.
I mean, and what we should also with a lot of games, I think what Assassin's Creed has always been incredibly good at is scripting. And I mean, not necessarily the story writing, but the actual screenplay, as I would call it.
Oh yeah.
Some of the writing for the characters has been phenomenal, and I'm talking throughout all the games. I mean, obviously, if you give a script to Roger Craig Smith, he's just going to run with it in whichever direction he feels is the best, and usually it's right. Which is why we've ended up with such a tremendous Ezio. But when I think about the script writing for the others as well, just some absolutely hilarious writing that just makes me want to bawl my eyes out.
Definitely.
I think that's where I see a lot of consistency through the
Definitely,
games.
absolutely.
Is in the writing, not always with the story, but definitely when it comes to the character development.
Definitely.
I think they've always done very, very well, and I think that's what entices people as well. It's not always the gameplay, because if you've got a character that's so one-dimensional, then you don't want to play as them, or you get bored of playing as them.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I guess overall, in terms of AC3's legacy here, just to get back to that, like, it's only a household title for those who care that for those who want it to be a household title. As we said, other than ACIII, which is just by default a legendary piece of video game history. And I think, as I said, that is the case for other games as well. But I think I'll save that for when we dive into those games on future episodes. So yeah. Just here finally, unless you have anything to add to this, I wanted to talk about AC3's, as I called it, semi-spin-off Assassin's Creed Liberation. And what were some of your favorite elements about that? And despite it being much smaller in scale, do you feel like that was a memorable AC experience?
Oh, come on, it's a lady.
Of course. It was the first time we played as a female assassin on screen.
I mean, that in itself is incredible.
Yeah, it was.
And I think with obviously everything that has been spoken about before regarding AC characters, especially women, the women's representation within games, I think Liberation is overlooked. I mean, I know we discuss it now, but previously,
Absolutely, and
with Odyssey coming along, and prior to that, Origins, you had a wonderfully strong, two incredibly strong women within Origins, and obviously then within Odyssey, you had the chance to play as a female, and again in Valhalla. But going back, to have a game, even though it's a much smaller game.
Yeah, it was originally.
A female as a.
I think it was originally released for the PSP, late 2012, and it was. Much smaller in scale.
It was Vita. It was on the Vita.
Oh yeah, it was Vita. And then they, at some point, and that's the first time I played it, they gave it an HD upgrade and put it on consoles. And then, as part of the ACIII remastered bundle, they were just put it in as well, which made me replay it again. And what I would say about it is, as I said, it's much, much smaller in scale. And while it isn't, as I call it, let's use the word household AC experience at all. I think there are a lot of people who may not even be aware this small spin-off exists. But it's still good. It has a decent story. Not that it's one too bad, neither too memorable. But it was cool, and where it took Aveline everything from the Louisiana bayou, which was pretty fun to free run around as well. Give me that, swinging in the trees and beating up crocodiles and all that. Her associates she met along the way, and how'd she go down to Mayan Mexico, Chichen Itza and those ancient sites. And there were definitely a lot of cool aspects of it, and the New Orleans, it was pretty fun to explore New Orleans as well. And but yeah, I really liked the Bayou map. If anything, just it was fun to.
I mean, for such a small game, and considering that it was originally on Vita, and I think it took at least another 2 years for it to go onto
X360 and PS3
onto a console.
At the time. Yeah.
At the time, I think they did again. It was another time where they covered on issues that were pretty interesting, but because it was such a small game, you probably weren't even aware that that it was focusing on events in American history, which were really, really quite important.
Yeah, and that's what I liked about it.
It was like the segregation laws, back to Africa movement, slave period.
Yeah.
You had so much going on at that time.
And that's just what you said I liked about it, and how it tied in perfectly to AC3. I mean, that was a big one of the most memorable parts of that game was the Connor crossover mission.
Yeah.
Up north, and her and Connor infiltrating that fort. That was pretty cool.
There was a lot going on.
And if anything, it was just, even if it didn't directly tie into AC3, it was still, as we said, a good way, a good part of that latter half of the 18th century universe, especially in the Americas. This felt like a totally different place, considering this was these were the French colonies and not the British colonies.
Exactly.
But it was still, a time of change, and it would only be, 40 years or something before Louisiana became part of the United States, and
exactly.
And Aveline's a character I would.
Spanish occupation at that point.
Yeah, and if anything, as said, yeah, it was cool to see Connor and Aveline at least cross paths. Reckon they're part of the same brotherhood and such. So if anything, I guess Liberation was just a kind of a small bonus. Mini game that was kind of along the lines of AC3, what you just played, and even ties into it in some ways here and there. And it was really just there as kind of a bonus, nothing too big and nothing too household or memorable necessarily. So yeah, that's what I guess you can say about that. And finally, Aveline's a character. She could be cool to see again. Have you heard of that? I think there was a PS exclusive mini expansion for Black Flag, actually, where you played a few. I've only seen walkthroughs of it. I'm on Xbox, so I can't play it. But it was kind of like Connor writing a letter to Aveline. I need you to help me find someone, a prisoner. I think it was called ACIII DLC, and it was just like 3 memories, no open world or anything. It was just really short. But ACIII's a character I would love to see again. I don't know if I've ever told you about that, but like, if we ever see another game, you know, which is what set in kind of wraps up Connor, Shay, those North American people's story. I would love to see ACIII again. Maybe even go totally brutal, like play as Shay killing ACIII or something. That could be brutal, but could make sense maybe. Yeah. So yeah. I think other than that, I think we've covered a lot of interesting things about AC3. There's not as much to cover, but maybe as that said, it's because AC3 just was what it was, and
I think what's important is, whilst it might not be the favourite on everybody's lips, it has to. You have to acknowledge the fact
there
that
was if you've
a
ever
lot was brought into it after the trilogy, and I think people sometimes forget that.
And if anything, it introduced the Kenways, which is like my favorite AC family. Like, I love the Kenways. You know, Edward, Connor, Haytham. I would love to see it going forward. I would love to see it again. I would love to. I love the Kenways. I mean, they're almost like the closest. They're almost like I think I've said this before, the closest thing Assassin's Creed has to a family, kind of like the Skywalkers or something.
That's very good, actually,
yeah. It's the closest thing. It's the closest thing AC has to that.
I like that.
So, but I talked about that way more in a previous episode. So I'm not going to get too much into that. But last thing I wanted to say here was, I don't know if you've ever heard about that, but there was once an AC podcast called, because Connor wasn't everyone's favorite character, the Kill Connor Club. Have you heard about that ever?
No, I haven't.
Yeah, it was. We kind of talked about it in the first episode of this way back, and the guest on that was Lasers, one of the guy who hosted that. They kind of evolved and started something new, but it was just, as they said, kind of a joke. Connor's not our favorite character and such, so yeah. But rather have somebody have a character that people don't like, as opposed to somebody that they don't care about at all. Absolutely.
Rather be known for being thoroughly disliked or.
And as I said,
nobody just wants that in between.
And that's that. Connor's a good character, but maybe he just needs a little bit more in reality.
Yeah.
Unless actually just we can just spend 2 minutes talking about that. Finally, I wanted to hear your take on the expansion we got, Tyranny of King Washington. How did you like that, actually?
I haven't played it.
Haven't you? Do that. Do that, and then we'll do episode 18.5 at some point. I'll just take my take on it. It was great. It was a cool way to kind of implement sci-fi elements into AC, and the excuse that it's just an alternate reality, none of it was really canon, made it work compared to nowadays where you have Medusa and werewolves and I don't even know, like, everything has just gone batshit crazy.
And flying horses. And
what?
And Odin.
Yeah. But yeah, Tyranny of King Washington, great. Get it played, and then we'll do episode 18.5 or something. But yeah. Other than that, do you have anything to add?
No. I guess I started off not really caring about AC3, and learned to appreciate and even maybe love it in certain places.
Yeah. Same for me. I have spent quite a lot of hours with it, and if anything, I just enjoy playing it. Like, both when I played on X360 back in the day and the remastered version here. So.
Yeah, I think it's one of those that needs to be acknowledged as a bloody good game for everything
for its time
and
AC. Yeah.
And what it brought to the AC franchise. It brought a lot of new stuff in, but without making it feel like it was too much for everybody. So yeah, sure. AC3 definitely worth it.
All right.
It's metal.
But other than that, I think that's it. So then I just want to thank everyone for watching and listening to episode 18 here of the Memory Corridor. And as always, stay up to date on everything happening here on the channel and more things Assassin's Creed. Links to my personal and Lisa's social media pages can be found in the description below, should you be interested in checking it out. And any feedback or topic ideas, feel free to share it down below as well. And Lisa, you're a portrait artist, so just quickly, do you have anything planned? Any coming projects you wanna plug here?
No, I am going to go back to my AC roots. Now that I've kind of swept the board and I've completed pretty much most of the major characters from each game, I'm now going to go back and redo a few. So
redo a few, okay.
Oh yeah, we will definitely be seeing Connor from the DLC. So his DLC.
Oh, in his Native American
Native
power.
American full
this bear powers and such.
War paint, yep.
Oh, that's cool.
I definitely Haytham again is on that list of people maybe without the tricorn hat these days.
I think I may have suggested you that at one point, but maybe do some of the more villains from Black Flag. I think it was.
No, I've got Black Flag characters to do as well.
Oh
there's
yeah.
So many.
I don't know how you are with like drawing details, but have you considered doing El Tiburon? You know, the bodyguard and that massive armor.
Let's just bring it down. I can just about live doing hair. I think if I end up starting doing armor, I may cry. I
Okay.
ended up doing an image of a plaid shirt the other day and just doing lines and stripes.
What?
I felt myself starting to cry after a while. I was like, I can't do this anymore. So my hats off to people that do the most absolutely incredible detail on pictures. Hats off to them because it takes a lot of concentration.
Absolutely. So yeah.
But no, you will be seeing a lot, a few more AC
absolutely.
portraits from me in the future.
We'll be excited to see those. So yeah. Then once again, thanks for tuning in, everybody. Hope to see everybody for the next retrospectives we're going to be doing here on the show. And until those come out, stay safe, everyone, and keep the community what it is. And thanks, Lisa, for joining me. It was a pleasure, and I hope you had fun. So, that wraps episode 18 of the Memory Corridor. Stay safe and active, everyone. See you later, Assassins. Peace.